Howdy everyone, Cassidy Civet here, with a surprise con announcement, this time about a con I will no longer be going to. The con in question? Midwest FurFest, or MFF as it's more commonly known. Now, what prompted me to make this decision? It might take a bit to explain, but perhaps by the end of this video, you'll understand why me and a sad number of other furs have some issues with this con. Let's get into the video. Brought to you by this video sponsor, me! Yep, it's still me. When the biggest fur con in the world would rather let furry musicians busk on the streets of Chicago, it's important to speak up and support the creatives that you want to see represented. Which brings me to the other sponsor of this video, con feedback forms. If you don't fill them out, how will the con ever know anything, good or bad? Remember to always fill them out. They're important. Alright, enough of that. So what finally led me to make the call to no longer attend the biggest fur con on Earth? Well, the quick answer is a personal one. I received an email of rejection from the con that was very vague as to what had been rejected, but when I saw the preliminary schedule, my heart just sank. It would appear after a successful grassroots concert last year with a great turnout despite being in a panel room that I was no longer worthy of even being listed in the schedule. I was given nothing. Not a show, not a panel, nothing. Though I quickly realized it wasn't just me. Concert after concert had been denied. Panels from people with strong showings at other cons, even in the Midwest, just flat out rejected. Some of the musician folks who didn't get a single spot include the likes of Pepper Coyote, Status Ferret, everyone associated with the Furry marching band, and me. To name just some of the ones that I know about that will be relevant for this video. Everything I'm mentioning in this video is public information, by the way, so you can draw your own conclusions from this information, at least for as long as Twitter lasts. And you know, I am kind of proud of my concert last year. I went out of my way to advertise it absolutely everywhere. I had printed flyers and I put them all over the con. I mean, having an hour-long full fursuit concert in a panel room was gonna be a challenge. But after my hard work, my little concert ended up being one of the top 3 most attended musical events of MFF last year. And as someone who made a point of performing all original music at this show, that really meant a lot to me, being a relatively small creator in the scheme of things. Speaking of schemes, here's the second reason I wanted to make a public point of not attending this con anymore. Obvious favoritism towards certain performers, perhaps even unwarrantedly so. You might be wondering who else performed at MFF last year and how their attendance was. Well, the top spot goes to Key Otter and Friends, with a whopping 120 registered attendees on Sked. They were even guest of honor at my first IFC this year, and yet they were on second stage. So who's on first? Great question and points for the classic reference. Main stage was, and seemingly continues to be, occupied by none other than Tygre Cub. Now, who is Tygre, you might be asking? Like anyone would after seeing them listed as the main furry music event. Well, from what I understand, they were just another furry content creator like many who came before. They did some VR singing. Then bam, they quickly got scooped up by many of the fandom's biggest content creators, and now they're the con-approved entertainment at some of the fandom's biggest events. This includes cons like Biggest Little Fur Con, where Tygre was main stage both last year and this year, the former being their first fur con ever, and the subject of this video, Midwest FurFest, where they headlined 2021, and of course, this year. Man, imagine being main stage in back-to-back years at 2 of the fandom's biggest events. Wow. Now obviously, cons promoting furry talent is not a bad thing! It is merely the unjustified nature of this treatment that I really want to bring attention to. Why are they always main stage? My personal example is pretty obvious, of course, that I, a full fursuit performer with a catalog of original music, gets relegated to a panel room with no AV help, if I'm even given that, while Tygre sings covers of Elton John songs on the main stage, not even in fursuit. For transparency and comparison's sake, I have only performed in my own show on main stage at 3 different cons in the US. This is supposed to be a 3. And the audience numbers seem to reflect this. Many attendees are just as puzzled why it seems like furry musicians are getting deliberately snubbed from some of these large events, while higher-ups seem to be working very hard to secure their new favorite person in the fandom the best spot on the best stage at the biggest con possible. If this doesn't scream bias, I don't know what does. And yes, at the upcoming Midwest FurFest, Tygre remains the only performer on main stage. Interesting. I will briefly diverge to mention that at MFF 2021, there was one other act to share main stage with Tygre, and that was the trio Menagerie. Menagerie? I don't know. A string-playing group of people that do mostly covers, and they seem to play up to 3 shows per con, as they did at MFF 2021. That's a bit odd. And yet this year, even they didn't get main stage again. So they've only got 2 shows now. Make of that what you will. Also, I guess only string players allowed? Sorry to everyone in the Furry marching band, I guess there's just no room for another concert. It also may not surprise you to learn that I have some personal beef with this kitty as well. It's just instinctual anytime I see ego-inflating privilege go unchecked. And I'm sure there's people out there who will more than happily tell you about the roast beef between us, but I mean, they call themselves the Singing Furry. Do I have to say more than that? Like, excuse me? I was the one on Canada's Got Talent, and even I don't call myself that. At least when they used the singing kitty a time or two, it didn't look like they were lost in their own ego.
So that's narcissism to the nth degree.
But now? Well, now it just seems like a person who got everything he ever wanted in the fandom without having to work for it, while being backed up by a collection of con leaders that will blacklist you if you try to speak up and say anything about it, at the cost of alienating every other musician in the furry fandom just to platform this Twitch streamer. And alienating other musicians they certainly have, one of whom is Pepper Coyote, who some of you may be familiar with as a solo artist or as half of Foxes and Peppers. We do in fact have a song together as well, but Pep is a lot more than just some semi-scandalous loudmouth on Twitter. Well, for one, he's the biggest advocate for platforming furry musicians at cons all across the country, and it just so happens over the years he's played at MFF, he's raised well into the 5 figures for their charity alone, at real live in-person events. You can even look at the BLFC 2021 charity numbers across their different events to see what I mean. Not too shabby for a guy that wasn't given any performances at the last 2 years of MFF, huh? Though last year they did at least let him vend in the dealer's den, where he sold many other furry music records at his table. This year, not a single table for furry music in the dealer's den. 0. Worth mentioning as well that at my full fursuit panel room concert from last MFF, it was actually Pepper who stepped up to help with AV. So big ups to him for helping me out when a con basically set me up to fail. This is in no way about putting specific people on main stage either. I'm not asking for special treatment, nor is anyone else in this video. Like, either be more transparent about it, set up a cool furry music showcase, like I'm sure the biggest con in the world has room for, but there is no process here. There is only one act on main stage. Let's look at who else actually got booked at MFF this year. They could have put Skurro's band on main stage. He's freaking talented, and he's friends with Will Toledo. Or how about Bagel Rabbit? They were main stage at Denver this year. They're a wicked talented fursuit violinist. And yet, I have to say again, for some reason, these large cons don't want to give the chance to be on main stage to anyone else. They are only interested in one headliner, the fandom's first industry plant, if you will. You may have noticed I'm putting up people's social numbers when I mention them. That's for people that think that matters. With all sorts of wild numbers running around all over the place, it's kind of hard to quantify what success is in such a thing as the furry fandom. That's why it's kind of more about effort and output. One example would be the earlier mentioned Status Ferret, a Midwest favorite who this year released their debut album of original music. Exactly the kind of small content creator that the fandom should be empowering with a chance on a stage, right? Or me, who recently released an album, 3 years ago? Anyway, meanwhile, Tygre's got the Singing Furry, ladies and gentlemen. Definitely deserves that name. And yet, I have to reiterate that this is bigger than any grudge anyone thinks that I may have at this point. There is no reasoning to this decision-making. Talented, hard-working people are being passed over because someone on staff has a crush on a VR streamer. Of course, not helping MFF's case is their terrible room lottery system, to which I must confess I am a loser of. and I'm far from the only one at that. Similar performer controversies surround MFF's DJ selection system, which currently seems to be one guy openly putting themselves and all their friends in the best spots year after year after year, according to the data I saw. The accusations made at the con recently as to who they support and protect sounds a little familiar to me, as well as reports that certain staff just don't respect trans people. You can look those up on your own time from people who know more than me, since I'm mostly just speaking from a wannabe singer's perspective. Regardless, the takeaway is clear. MFF has overstayed its welcome as the destination con, at least for me, and for many, many other creatives in the fandom who continue to be shut out by the leadership's favoritism. This is the only con big enough to warrant a giant explainer video like this, but you can see I have some similar issues with BLFC. Furry music in general is undervalued in a way that's really devastating to the niche. When cons do have the power to do something about it and platform us, furry music deserves a fair playing field. When we're given a chance, people do come. And I'm trying to use whatever supposed platform I've got to tell people about what's going on at these large cons in the US. Frankly, I'd recommend people go to some smaller cons instead. I've had the pleasure of traveling to quite a few of those smaller regional American cons in the last year. I recommend people go check them out. Or even more performer-focused cons, like Further Confusion or Texas Furry Fiesta. Setting all beef-filled baggage aside, this video is not meant to be an attack and not meant to get people cancelled or whatever. It's just meant to get these conversations started. No one who attends furry conventions should be afraid to ask questions to the staff, and certainly not those that receive rejection emails with no explanation. Why was this decision made? Or even, what panel was denied? How is such a simple question so hard for them to answer? Do we really have to wait for the schedule to drop to discover it ourselves? This just feels so deliberate that one can reach the conclusion they are actively rejecting panels and performers to prioritize their own preferred people. Plain and simple. And despite the threats I've received when talking in the past about cons, I won't stop. I've been threatened by everyone from con staff to the popufers they prop up, and yet I still refuse to keep quiet. They don't want anyone to ask questions, so that means we have to ask more of them. And then maybe, just maybe, there'll be some changes made. And you know what? It sucks to make this kind of video, where I have to say that yes, even in the furry fandom, favoritism and connections are everything. This just happens to be the time where I think it's the most obvious, and I want to say something about it. Leave it to the girl from Vancouver to make a video about the shady shit going on at American cons. I'm from the west coast of Canada here, so I'm the outsider, and this is my observation. Coming from the fur that was on Canada's Got Talent, you'd probably think, heck, I was the one getting the special treatment at the big American fur con. But the reality is a lot sadder than that. This isn't an unfixable issue. Some cons already have all musicians performing on the same stage. Did you read that fun fact on screen earlier? It's on the test. To the people watching this that don't have a clue what happens on Twitter before the event, lucky you. I hope I explained this adequately and that you kind of understand what I'm going through as a small POC content creator trying to find a performance space within my own fandom. Me and so many others have put so much time in just to seemingly be overlooked on purpose. And some furries are gonna hate me for this video, but who knows how long Twitter will exist. I won't be bullied into silence. I've always been in the minority all my life for all sorts of things, and I love this fandom too much to stay quiet. Well, that's all I have to say on the matter. I'm sure this video won't make me any new fans in those con leadership echo chambers, but considering their decision making is basically already corrupt, oh well. I decided I'm gonna stick with smaller, cooler cons for a while. And you can say what you will about the demographics of con staff or furries in general, but I've started to notice something. While I've been putting the work in for years, yet again, an outspoken person of color gets passed over. Art imitates life. Or something like that. Enough with the disses. I need to wrap this up. I could go on all day. So thanks to everyone who supports me. I'm sorry I couldn't go to MFF. You can see why. But I do have other cons coming up, and my second swing at Eurovision. What's that? Want to find out more about the big, bold Civet and her cool adventures? The best way to learn about them all and to be here for future uploads is to hit that subscribe button. Follow me at all my social media links in the description as well, while I figure out where to go after Twitter dies. For the most die-hard fans, there is of course my Patreon. All patrons get their names at the end of my videos, and printed on my next album if a patron at the time of printing. Oh, that was a mouthful. Speaking of, look at those cool patron names! Shout out to my top patron again, Cassidy's Toy. I'll be at the recording studio soon, as early as next week, making progress on Cruel Oasis. And recording my next Eurovision entry, of course. Next cons for me will be Anther Northwest, no concert, and FC, undetermined. So don't miss me, and I'll see you beautiful people there. So farewell, and remember to support furry music.